Pam clenched her hands in the pockets of her old coat as she entered the luxurious car dealership on the outskirts of town. The huge glass windows gleamed in the sunlight, and the polished marble floor reflected the bright light of the chandeliers. Every step smelled of expensive perfume and the leather of new cars. She felt out of place in this environment. Her old shoes creaked softly on the floor as she approached the shiny black Range Rover. Her heart pounded. She knew her husband Trevor had always dreamed of owning such a car. She had saved money for months, and although she knew it wouldn't be enough for a new model, she hoped to find something pre-owned. A young man in an expensive suit, which clung to him like a second skin, approached her. His name on the name tag was Mark. His gaze slid over Pam from top to bottom, stopping at the worn cuffs of her coat. "How can I help you?" Mark's voice was cold, lacking any hint of sincerity. "I'm looking for a Range Rover." "Maybe a pre-owned model," Pam replied, trying to sound confident. Mark barely suppressed a sneer. "We don't sell cheap cars here." He emphasized the word cheap, as if it were dirt. "We only have new models." Pam felt her face flush with embarrassment. "I just want to take a look," she started, but Mark interrupted her. "Madam, perhaps you'd be better off looking elsewhere." His smile was strained. Pam felt her heart sink. She took a step back. "I have the right to look." Her voice trembled. "Madam, we try to maintain the atmosphere of our establishment at the appropriate level." Mark leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you're not planning to buy, I'll have to ask you to leave." "But—" "Please leave the showroom." Mark's voice now held clear disdain. Pam stood frozen as two security guards approached her from either side. They silently pointed to the door. Her heart squeezed with shame and humiliation. Pam could feel the stares of the other customers, elegantly dressed men and women, evaluating her the same way Mark had. She turned silently and walked toward the exit, trying to hide the tears welling up in her eyes. When Pam stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold wind stung her face. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. After a few rings, Trevor's voice came through the receiver. "Pam? What's wrong?" "No," her voice was hoarse. "I just wanted to hear your voice." "I'll be home in half an hour," Trevor said. "Is everything okay?" Pam took a deep breath. "Yes, everything's fine." She slipped the phone into her pocket and took one last look at the shiny windows of the dealership. Mark was standing by the door, looking at her with a mocking gleam in his eyes. "I'll be back," Pam thought. "Oh, I'll be back." The next day, at 10 a.m., a black Rolls-Royce Phantom with tinted windows appeared at the entrance to the dealership. The driver, wearing a black suit and white gloves, opened the car door. Silence fell in the showroom. Both customers and staff stood still, watching the spectacle. Pam, now in a new coat and standing tall, stepped out of the car. Mark, who was standing by the entrance, stared at her in disbelief, mouth agape. Pam stopped next to him, her eyes gleaming with cold determination. "Now, do you have time for me?" she asked, her voice calm but with a note of steel. Mark tried to say something, but at that moment, the doors of the Rolls-Royce opened again, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out. "Trevor." "Pam, darling." His voice was warm. "Sorry I'm a bit late." All eyes in the showroom were fixed on them. Mark paled when he realized who was standing before him. Is this your wife?" he barely managed to say. Trevor gave him a cold look. "Yes. And I want to know why she was thrown out of this showroom yesterday." Pam lifted her chin. "I just wanted to look at the car." Her voice was steady, but her eyes sparkled. Trevor put his arm around her shoulders and turned to Mark. "Choose your words carefully. Otherwise, I'll buy this dealership tomorrow, and you'll be the first person I fire." Mark paled and quickly stepped back, stammering. "Of course." "Yes. I'm sorry." Pam smiled slightly. She wasn't done yet. Pam stood silently by the entrance of the car dealership, her face burning with shame and humiliation. A gentle breeze stirred her hair, but she remained motionless. Her heart was pounding so loudly that it seemed like the passers-by on the street could hear it. Her eyes slowly filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them back, not allowing them to fall. No, she wouldn't cry here, in front of everyone. The words of the manager echoed in her mind, cutting deeper than any knife. "We only serve serious customers. Are you sure you can afford this car? Maybe you should look for something cheaper?" She tightened her grip on her handbag and took a step forward, but suddenly felt a slight dizziness. She stopped, took a breath, and looked around. Several salespeople near the entrance were still eyeing her with smug smiles. One of them, the same young consultant with styled hair, turned to his colleague and quietly said, "Did she really think she could afford a Rolls-Royce?" Huh. Pam closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her anger. She had grown up in a modest family, accustomed to saving, but now it wasn't about money. It was about respect, dignity, about how she was treated. She turned back to the car parked at the curb, an old sedan she'd been driving for over 10 years. Starting the engine, Pam pulled out onto the main road, but her hands were shaking on the wheel. A plan was already forming in her mind. That evening, Pam sat silently at the kitchen table at home. Trevor had just returned from a business meeting. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, but his eyes shone with the tired confidence of someone used to controlling everything around them. He sat across from Pam and noticed her tense face. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Pam looked up at him. "I went to the car dealership today," she began. Trevor leaned forward, intrigued. "And?" "They humiliated me." Her voice was even but cold. "They thought I couldn't afford a Rolls-Royce. They laughed in my face." Trevor's expression immediately changed. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened. "Who exactly?" "The manager and one of the consultants. They didn't even let me sit in the car." Trevor slowly lifted his head, his gaze turning icy. "Which dealership did you go to?" Pam gave him the address. Trevor nodded and stood up from the table. "Tomorrow they'll regret it." Pam grabbed his hand. "No, Trevor." Her voice was firm. "I want them to regret it differently." He looked at her with curiosity. "What are you planning?" Pam smiled at the corners of her mouth. "I want to see how they'll treat me when you arrive there tomorrow." In the Rolls-Royce. The next morning, Pam stood at the same car dealership, but this time she wasn't alone. Slowly, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom rolled into the parking lot, perfectly polished, with tinted windows and an elegant gleam on the body. The driver opened the door, and Trevor stepped out first in a flawless suit, with a shiny watch on his wrist. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes radiated cold confidence. Pam stepped out after him, holding onto his arm. She was in a simple but elegant coat, her hair neatly styled. She looked calm and dangerously confident. The silence on the parking lot was palpable. The salespeople were literally frozen in place, seeing the car and Trevor approaching the entrance. The manager, the same one who had humiliated Pam the day before, nervously stepped forward to greet them. "Welcome to our dealership," he mumbled, trying to hide his nervousness. "How can I help you?" Pam took a step forward and looked the manager straight in the eye. "Yesterday, you told me I couldn't afford a Rolls-Royce. Do you remember?" The manager began to pale. "That was a misunderstanding." Trevor tilted his head. "Do you often allow such misunderstandings?" No, of course not. It's an exception." "Fine." Trevor pulled a checkbook from the inner pocket of his jacket. "Here's the deal. I want to buy this Rolls-Royce. In cash. Right now. And I want the same person who humiliated my wife yesterday to handle the sale." The manager's eyes widened. She doesn't work here." Pam smiled. "Then that's a problem you'll have to solve." Trevor extended the check. "If the deal isn't processed through her, I'll take this check to the next dealership." The manager began nodding frantically, licking his dry lips. I'll take care of it right now." Trevor leaned in close and quietly said, "You have exactly 5 minutes." Pam smiled. She knew this wasn't the end. Pam slowly ran her hand over the polished hood of the Rolls-Royce. Her gaze was cold and calm, but inside a fire raged. The manager nervously stepped back, licking his lips and glancing at Trevor. His hands were noticeably trembling. I'll immediately call the consultant, he stammered, spinning on his heels and almost running to the office. Trevor put his arm around Pam's waist, leaning toward her ear. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Pam smiled slightly. Not quite yet. The showroom doors opened, and the same consultant approached, the guy with styled hair and an overly confident stride. But this time, his face was pale. His eyes were wide with fear. Good morning, he mumbled, trying to smile. How can I help you? Pam took a step closer to him, never breaking eye contact. Yesterday, you told me I couldn't afford a Rolls-Royce. Do you remember that? The guy turned even paler. I didn't mean to offend. It was a misunderstanding. Pam crossed her arms over her chest. Oh, I understood you very well. The consultant swallowed nervously and glanced at the manager, who stood off to the side with a stone-faced expression. Well, Pam took another step closer to him, her voice still cold. If you think I can't afford a Rolls-Royce, I want to see you close the deal. Right now. The guy looked at Trevor, who was silently watching with a piercing stare. Maybe you should handle this through the senior manager, the consultant mumbled. No, Pam cut him off sharply. You specifically. The consultant stood frozen in place, confused. The manager opened his mouth to say something, but Trevor raised his hand. If you can't handle the deal, Trevor's voice was quiet but sharp. Say it now. We'll go to a competitor. No. The manager grabbed the consultant by the shoulder. Handle the deal. The guy slowly nodded and nervously led Pam and Trevor to the desk inside the showroom. They sat down. Pam calmly placed her hands on the table and watched as the consultant tried to gather the papers, his hands visibly shaking. And now, Pam looked at him. Tell me, please, what options come with this Rolls-Royce? The consultant awkwardly flipped through the papers. Leather interior. Massage system in the seats. Heated steering wheel. He swallowed between words, fumbling with the papers. Heated steering wheel? Pam raised an eyebrow slightly. Interesting. What about automatic door closing? Yes, of course. Automatic door closing is included in the standard package. In the standard package? Pam smiled, her voice almost sweet. Good to know. The consultant wiped the sweat from his forehead again. Pam could feel the control shifting to her. One more thing, she said, leaning forward. How long is the warranty on this Rolls-Royce? 5 years or 50,000 miles, he mumbled. Right. And that includes all types of repairs, correct? Yes. His voice cracked on a high note. Pam leaned back in her chair. Perfect. Then start processing the deal. The guy, with trembling hands, began filling out the documents. Trevor exchanged a glance with the manager and subtly smiled. When the deal was done, the consultant cautiously extended the pen for Pam to sign. She slowly took it, ran her fingers along the metal body, and signed her name with a firm, confident hand. Pam stood up and approached the consultant, who still looked as though he might faint. She leaned in close to him, her lips barely touching his ear. Remember this moment, she whispered. Next time, think twice before humiliating someone. Pam walked away, and Trevor put his arm around her waist. They headed toward the exit. Excuse me, ma'am. The manager's voice sounded from behind them. Pam and Trevor turned around. I would like to apologize once again for the behavior of our staff. This is unacceptable, and I promise we will review our internal service standards. Pam silently looked at him, then at the consultant, who stood with his head down. It's too late, she said calmly. You've already shown everything. She approached the Rolls-Royce, got in the driver's seat, and closed the door. Trevor sat beside her. She pressed the gas pedal, and the car smoothly pulled away. "So what now?" Trevor asked as they drove onto the main road. Pam looked at him with a barely noticeable smile. "Now, we pick a dealership to buy a Lamborghini." The Rolls-Royce glided over the smooth asphalt of the city's night, the soft purring of the engine almost blending with the sound of the rain tapping lightly against the windshield. Inside the car, there was an eerie silence. Pam was staring at the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel with confidence. Trevor sat next to her, watching her with a slight squint. "You were ruthless," he smiled, but his voice betrayed tension. Pam didn't take her eyes off the road. They got what they deserved. Trevor ran a hand along the armrest. "And yet, you could have just walked away." Pam slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a stop at a red light. She slowly turned her head to him. "Why should I walk away when I can make them feel what humiliation is?" The city lights reflected in her cold gray eyes. Trevor leaned in closer. "You're enjoying this, Pam. It's dangerous." She smiled. "Worried I'll go too far?" "I know you already have." Trevor's voice grew low and harsh. The light turned green, and Pam pressed the gas pedal again. The car moved smoothly forward. Her fingers tightened around the wheel. She turned left, heading toward the outskirts of the city. "Where are we going?" Trevor asked. "You'll see." She turned down a side street lit by dim lamps. Ahead stood an old warehouse with rusted gates. Pam stopped the car and turned off the engine. "Pam," Trevor frowned. "What is this place?" "Let's go." She stepped out of the car, and despite his doubts, Trevor followed her. Pam pulled a small key from her coat pocket and walked toward the gates. She inserted the key into the lock and twisted it. The gates creaked open. "Is anyone here?" Trevor glanced around at the dark space inside. "Yes." Pam's voice was ice cold. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the dark. A man emerged from the shadows, tall, muscular, wearing a black leather jacket. His face was shrouded in semi-darkness, but his gaze was piercing and cold. "Is this him?" the man rasped. Pam nodded. "He insulted me." "What?" Trevor spun around her. "Pam, what are you planning?" "I just want him to learn a lesson," Pam said calmly, but there was a cold fire in her eyes. The man in the jacket took a step forward, and Trevor instinctively stepped back. "You're crossing a line, Pam." "No," she tilted her head. "This is just behavior correction." Trevor tried to grab her hand, but Pam swiftly stepped back. "Pam, you can't." "I can do whatever I want." Her voice was sharp, like a blade. The man in the jacket took another step forward, and Trevor felt a chill run through him. "Don't do this," Trevor hissed. Pam walked up to the man and whispered, "Do you remember how he looked at me at the car dealership? How he spoke to me? He needs to understand what real fear is." The man nodded and took another step toward Trevor. "Pam, stop this." Trevor's voice was nearly panicked. "And why?" Pam took a half step forward. "You said I've gone too far. Let's find out just how far." The man raised his hand. "Stop." Trevor jumped back. "Pam, I love you, but this is madness." Pam froze. Her eyes narrowed. "You love me." "Yes." Trevor took a step toward her. "And if you do this, everything will change. We can never go back." An intense silence hung between them. The man in the jacket stood still, waiting for a signal. Pam looked at Trevor, her face cold, but something that looked like doubt flickered in her eyes. "Pam." Trevor took another step toward her, his voice softening. "If you let this happen now, we lose everything." Her fingers clenched into a fist. She took a deep breath and waved her hand. "Step back." The man in the jacket nodded and stepped back into the darkness. Trevor moved closer to Pam and took her hands. "Pam, enough." She was silent for a few seconds before slowly saying, "You don't know how hard it is to stop once you felt the power. You can stop. Just trust me." Pam exhaled slowly and lowered her head. Okay, but if anyone else tries to humiliate me, I won't stop. I know. Trevor pulled her into an embrace. Pam raised her head, her eyes still cold. Let's go home. Trevor wrapped his arm around her waist. They returned to the Rolls-Royce and drove off. The rain outside grew heavier. Pam silently stared ahead, her fingers still gripping the wheel tightly. Do you really think this is the end? She quietly asked. Trevor looked at her with concern. What do you mean? She smiled faintly at the corners of her lips. We'll see. When they returned home, Pam was sitting at the table in her luxurious kitchen, her face illuminated by the soft light of a desk lamp. Trevor stood nearby, breathing heavily, his appearance worn, as if he had been through more than one fight. He knew that every time they crossed that line, things got even more complicated, and now he felt they were approaching the edge. You haven't changed, Pam, he said quietly, glancing at her. And I'm not sure I can handle this. Pam looked up. Her gaze was calm, but inside, there burned a bitter determination. Not changed? Trevor, she paused, you know that's not true. I've always been like this. You're just now seeing the real Pam. Trevor felt a chill run down his skin. He understood that her word real had nothing to do with what he had imagined about her at the beginning. He had lost hope that he could convince her, because Pam was the kind of person who made choices, even if those choices destroyed everything around her. Do you really want this? Trevor moved closer, his voice growing more anxious. Do you understand that every step like this takes you further from who you once were? Pam raised her hand to calm him, but her movements were quick and decisive. I'm no longer who I was before. What I'm doing now is my fight, my own battle to not leave my life in the hands of others. I will no longer be their victim, Trevor. Trevor took a step back, his heart aching with pain. It was hard for him to believe that the person he loved was capable of making such a decision. He felt that he could no longer stand by her in this chaos. If this is your choice, he said slowly, I can't be part of it. I can't watch you destroy yourself and everything we had. Pam remained silent, not looking away. There was no anger in her eyes, only indifference, as if she had already made her choice and had no intention of turning back. I understand, she replied softly. It's your decision, Trevor. He stood for a long time, not knowing what to do, and finally turned around. Pam didn't follow him. She stayed in place, in the same cold state she had been in all this time. Every step they took moved them further apart, and now it seemed that there was no way to turn back. Trevor left the house, leaving her in the silence that seemed to shrink everything around them. He could no longer be her support, and now, as they walked separate paths, he understood that not even love could stop what had already happened. Pam remained in the silence, and only in her thoughts did the words spin that she had known for a long time, but now they became their final conclusion. Sometimes, to win, you have to be ready to lose everything. She looked at the dark sky visible through the windows of her house. There was no sadness in her heart, only quiet confidence that what she had done was the right step. And so their story ended. They were no longer together, but their paths, though they had parted, left a mark behind. And while Pam stood there, she already understood that this was only the beginning of her new life. Trevor walked through the night city, not knowing where he was going. His thoughts were torn apart, and even the cold wind couldn't cool the emptiness that had formed inside him. He remembered how once he and Pam made plans, dreamed of a future that now seemed distant and unreal. But everything had changed, and now, left alone, he understood that nothing of what they once had would ever return. At that time, Pam stood in her house, feeling the cold seep into her soul. She wasn't sure if she had done the right thing, but she knew one thing: it was necessary. Her choice was her own. She could no longer stay in a world where her desires and dreams were controlled. Now she was alone, and it was her decision. Trevor returned home a few hours later, his mind clear. He didn't know what to do with what was left behind. their bond, their love. Now it was just memories that felt foreign and heavy. But he still couldn't completely let her go. A few days later, he decided to write Pam a message. "I've thought it through. Maybe I didn't understand you, and now it doesn't matter. But I'll always remember the good times we had. I hope you find what you're looking for." He didn't expect a reply, but when his phone buzzed again a few minutes later, he still felt his heart race in his chest. She had written, "Thank you, Trevor. I've already found what I was looking for." And then he understood. Their paths had parted, and each of them, though still alone, was continuing to move forward. Life didn't stop, and now Pam had her path, and Trevor had his. And although their story was difficult and painful, in the end, they both found their freedom, though at a very high cost. And that was something they couldn't avoid.